Back to the channel. Today we're going to unravel some incredibly complex events in Genoa. Rumors are circulating around the Newman family, but what's the truth? In this video, I'll summarize the plot points that will be revealed in the next episode. Stay tuned to see what happens. Welcome back to our channel for another thrilling dive into the drama of Genoa City. Today is a beautiful day to unpack the explosive twists and turns coming your way. So grab your favorite beverage and let's get right into the heart of the action. As the heavy, suffocating fog of medically induced slumber began to lift, Nikki Newman found herself slowly clawing her way back to consciousness within the sterile, unforgiving confines of her hospital room. The rhythmic, monotonous beeping of the heart monitor served as a cruel reminder of her terrifying reality. A malignant tumor was aggressively pressing against her optic nerve, a ticking time bomb inside her own head. As she fluttered her eyelids open, the excruciating, blinding headache that had precipitated her collapse had momentarily subsided to a dull, throbbing ache, but the terrifying physical toll remained. Her vision was heavily blurred, casting the stark white hospital room into a hazy, distorted watercolor of muted shapes and terrifying shadows. She was vulnerable, physically compromised, and staring down the very real possibility of permanent blindness, a fate that terrified her to her core. Through the hazy distortion of her failing eyesight, a familiar, imposing silhouette materialized at her bedside. It was Victor Newman. To the outside world, and perhaps even to himself in his own twisted sense of reality, he presented the perfect image of the devoted, trustworthy patriarch standing vigil over his ailing wife. He wore his concern like a meticulously tailored suit, a seemingly trustworthy figure projecting strength and unwavering support. But as Nikki's blurred vision attempted to focus on his face, her sharp, intuitive mind pierced right through the carefully constructed facade. She did not see a worried, loving husband. She saw the cold, calculating, and relentlessly controlling glint in his eyes. He was analyzing her weakness, assessing the situation not with the compassion of a partner, but with the strategic calculation of a warden overseeing a high-value prisoner. In that profound moment of vulnerability, a terrifying epiphany washed over Nikki, illuminating a secret conspiracy unfolding in the shadows of their marriage. For months, she had ignored the subtle, suspicious signs, desperately wanting to believe in the sanctity of their bond. But the truth was undeniable. Victor was not her protector. He was the mastermind behind a sprawling, insidious conspiracy to subjugate everyone around him, including her. He was using her medical crisis, her moments of sheer terror, as a convenient smokescreen to consolidate his absolute power. He thrived on her dependence, utilizing her illness as a mechanism to dictate her movements, isolate her from her true allies, and rewrite the hierarchy of the Newman Empire without interference. The seemingly trustworthy figure of the great Victor Newman was, in reality, the architect of a psychological prison. Nikki's mind raced as the puzzle pieces of Victor's recent betrayals violently snapped into place. The most egregious and unforgivable of these betrayals was his secret, shadowy alliance with Matt Clark. Matt was a known psychopath, a monster who had inflicted unimaginable trauma and terror upon their son Nick and their former daughter-in-law Sharon. Yet Victor, operating as a shadow mastermind, had secretly harbored this dangerous fugitive at the Newman Ranch, manipulating Matt's amnesia to use him as a pawn in his corporate vendettas. How could a man who claimed to love his family invite the very devil into their sanctuary? It was a sickening revelation that exposed the absolute moral bankruptcy of Victor's grand designs. He was willing to sacrifice the psychological safety of his own children on the altar of his insatiable need for control and revenge. The scope of Victor's secret conspiracy extended far beyond harboring dangerous criminals. Nikki thought of the elaborate, terrifying plot involving artificial intelligence that Victor had deployed to frame Phyllis Summers and Kane Ashby. He had weaponized technology to fabricate evidence, manipulating the justice system and destroying lives simply because they had dared to challenge his authority. This was the work of a megalomaniacal mastermind operating entirely unchecked in the shadows. Victor had transformed from a ruthless businessman into a tyrannical puppet master, pulling the strings of everyone in Genoa City while hiding behind the mask of a respectable, trustworthy billionaire. Nikki realized with horrifying clarity that she was just another string for him to pull, another asset to be managed and controlled in his grand, twisted game of chess. The simmering resentment that had been building inside Nikki for years suddenly reached a boiling point. All the past grievances, the times he had callously forced her out of their home when she displeased him, the relentless emotional manipulation, the way he treated her like a fragile, broken doll rather than an equal partner, it all surged to the surface. She remembered the suffocating feeling of his ultimatums, his demands that she sever ties with her dearest friend, Jack Abbott, simply because it bruised his fragile ego. Victor's love was conditional, transactional, and entirely dependent on her absolute submission to his will. The realization that her current physical weakness was exactly what he wanted, a state that allowed him to exert maximum control, ignited a furious, burning fire deep within her soul. Despite the debilitating weakness in her limbs and the terrifying blurriness of her vision, Nikki found a reservoir of primal strength. The confrontation escalated with the force of a volcanic eruption. She pushed herself up against the sterile hospital pillows, her chest heaving, and unleashed a verbal explosion that shattered the quiet of the room. She screamed at Victor, her voice raw and trembling with absolute fury, demanding that he get out of her sight immediately. She called him out for exactly what he was, a hypocrite, a manipulator, and a cold-blooded mastermind who cared more about his own power than he ever did about her well-being. She laid bare his betrayals, screaming about Matt Clark, the AI framing, and his relentless, suffocating need to dominate her existence. Victor was genuinely stunned by the sheer ferocity of her attack. The great mastermind, who always prided himself on anticipating every possible move and countermove, was completely blindsided by this visceral, violent rejection from his ailing wife. His mask of the caring, trustworthy husband cracked, revealing the shocked, bruised ego of the ruthless dictator beneath. He instinctively tried to regain control, his deep, resonant voice attempting to gaslight her into submission. He tried to spin his web of lies, justifying his shadow conspiracies and his alliance with Matt Clark as necessary measures to protect the family. He tried to dismiss her rage as a mere symptom of her illness, a temporary emotional imbalance caused by the tumor and the medication. But Nikki was entirely immune to his manipulation. She saw right through the mastermind's betrayals and refused to let him invalidate her reality. With a chilling, absolute finality, she delivered a devastating ultimatum. She looked him dead in the eye, her blurry vision unable to mask the piercing clarity of her resolve, and declared that she would rather face her terrifying illness completely alone than endure his suffocating hypocrisy for one more second. She told him that she would rather go blind, that she would rather face the darkest, most terrifying consequences of her tumor than rely on a man whose concept of love was synonymous with imprisonment. It was a powerful, earth-shattering declaration of independence that echoed off the hospital walls. In that defining moment, Nikki realized that she could no longer be a passive participant in her own life. She needed to launch her own secret investigations to counter Victor's overarching conspiracy. She had already taken the first crucial step in the shadows by secretly contacting Christine Blair to draft a new ironclad will, ensuring that Victor could not use her potential medical incapacitation to seize her assets or rewrite the power structure of Newman Enterprises. But she knew she had to go further. She needed to uncover the full, terrifying extent of his secret dealings, his manipulations, and his alliances. She had to protect her legacy and her children from the mastermind who was actively destroying their family from the inside out under the guise of protection. Faced with her unyielding, explosive fury, Victor was forced into a humiliating retreat. The realization dawned on him that his wife had completely slipped from his grasp, that his carefully constructed illusion of control had been shattered into a million pieces. He stepped back from the hospital bed, his posture rigid, his jaw clenched in a tight line of suppressed fury. He turned on his heel and walked out of the room, his heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing ominously in the sterile hallway. But Nikki knew better than to believe that the war was over. A mastermind like Victor Newman does not simply accept defeat. He regroups, recalculates, and prepares to strike back with even greater force. In the cold, shadowy corridors of the hospital, Victor's shock rapidly morphed into a dark, simmering rage. As he walked away, he was already plotting his retaliation. If Nikki would not be a compliant, grateful victim, if she dared to challenge his absolute authority, he would orchestrate a new phase of his conspiracy to neutralize her resistance. He began to calculate how he could use her medical condition against her, perhaps orchestrating a legal or medical maneuver to declare her unfit to make her own decisions, effectively stripping her of the very autonomy she was fighting so desperately to maintain. The conspiracy was deepening, evolving into a terrifying battle for control over Nikki's life and legacy. The serious consequences of this escalating shadow war were catastrophic, threatening to tear the very fabric of Genoa City apart. If the absolute truth of Victor's overarching conspiracy were to be fully revealed, if the public, the SEC, and the authorities discovered his alliance with the psychopathic Matt Clark, his illegal use of artificial intelligence to frame innocent people, and his tyrannical attempts to medically subjugate his own wife, the fallout would be apocalyptic. The Newman Empire, built on decades of ruthless ambition, would face unprecedented legal ruin and public disgrace. Victor's carefully maintained image as a trustworthy, powerful titan of industry would be obliterated, exposing him as a criminal mastermind. The collateral damage would destroy his relationships with his children, leaving a legacy of ashes and betrayal. Back in the quiet solitude of her hospital room, Nikki was left alone with the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and the terrifying reality of her failing health. Her vision remained a blurry, frightening haze, but her mental and emotional clarity had never been sharper. The explosive confrontation had drained her physical strength, leaving her exhausted and trembling, but it had also liberated her soul. She had drawn a definitive line in the sand, officially declaring war on the man she had loved and fought with for decades. The battle lines were drawn, and the stakes were nothing less than her life, her legacy, and her fundamental right to exist free from Victor's tyrannical shadow. As she lay back against the pillows, Nikki prepared herself for the monumental